Hello and welcome to Commander 99's Deck Tech series. I'm Austin and let's talk about what's in the 99 this week. Today's commander is Edgar Markov. For 3 colorless, a red, white, and black, you have a Vampire Knight with first strike, haste, and whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. This card has an exceptional ability for commander with Eminence. Whether Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, anytime you cast a vampire spell, you create a 1/1 black vampire token. Already these abilities provide for an aggressive build path, with casting vampires early and quickly damaging your opponents. To start, this deck plays vampires that produce +1/+1 counters, or cards that pump up all of your creatures. Olivia, Mobilized for War, has another creature enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter and haste if you discard a card. When Drana, Liberator of Malakir, deals damage, each attacking creature gets a +1/+1 counter. Rakish Air and Stencia Masquerade give your vampires +1/+1 counters when they deal combat damage. Necropolis Regent gives counters equal to the amount of combat damage you deal to a player, and Mephedros Vampire lets your creatures get counters when they deal damage to other creatures. Metallic Mimic will have any vampire enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. Captivating Vampire says other vampires you control get +1/+1, and tapping 5 untapped vampires lets you gain control of an opponent's creature. Stormkirk Captain also gives your other vampires +1/+1 and first strike. Bloodline Keeper taps to put a vampire token into play, and when you control 5 or more vampires on board, it can transform to give your other vampires +2/+2. Vampire Nocturnus lets you play with the top card of your library revealed, and if the card is black, it and other vampires you control get +2/+1 and flying. There are other ways to give your vampires +1/+1, including Coat of Arms. For 5 mana, each creature gets +1/+1 for every other creature that shares a type with it. When Obelisk of Erd enters the battlefield, it gives creatures of a chosen type +2/+2, and you're able to reduce the cost of this spell by tapping your creatures. Door of Destinies gives +1/+1 for each charge counter on it. Sorin can immediately give you an emblem that gives your creatures +1/+0 until the end of the game. Elish Norn buffs your vampires while reducing the power of your opponent's creatures. Mirror Entity will make each of your creatures' base power and toughness equal to the number of mana you spend. These are all great ways to power up your vampires and the tokens you produce with Edgar Markov's ability. Having the Mardu color base, most of the ramp in this deck does come from artifact mana with cards like Soul Ring, Rakdos, and Orzhov's Signet, Worn Power Stone, and Thran Dynamo, and there are a few creature ramps with Burnished Heart, Solemn Simulacrum, Core Cartographer, Pawn of Ulamog, and Cryptghast. This deck has a few protection tools or ways to de-incentivize other players. Boros Charm can make your creatures indestructible, Yahenni can make himself indestructible, Lightning Greaves for Shroud and Haste. Cards like Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos are great edict effects to force your opponent to sacrifice a creature if they choose to block any of your vampires, which is a great way to clear the board for your next oncoming attack. There's some added removal with Vandal Blast and Chaos Warp. Bloodline Necromancer returns 1 vampire creature back to the battlefield, and Patriarch's Bidding can return all vampires from your grave back to the battlefield. This deck also has a bit of card draw to gain you advantages. With cards like Mentor of the Meek, you can pay 1 mana anytime a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield to draw a card. Skull Clamp is also a great card in this deck because when you cast a vampire, you make a 1/1 token, you equip Skull Clamp to it, the token dies, and you draw 2 cards. Faithless Looting, Tormenting Voice, Cathartic Reunion are all ways to discard vampires with madness abilities or just cards you don't need at the moment. This deck has some enchantment draw engines with Necropotence, Phyrexian Arena, or Outpost Siege, and some situational card draw with Asylum Visitor, Bygone Bishop, and Stormkirk Oculist. So this deck is Mardu aggressive vampires with +1/+1 synergies. This deck is built around Edgar Markov and his Eminence ability, focusing on +1/+1 combat abilities. That's it for this Commander Deck Tech. If you enjoyed the video, you can share it, give it a like, or subscribe to the channel.